So here's my list of what I consider to be the greatest TV shows of all time and why I think they're the best. Let's get into it. Sopranos. This should come as no shock to anyone who does any greatest TV list. The Sopranos will be on it. Starring James Gandolfini and created by David Chase. It ran from 1997 to 2000, no, 1999 to 2007. And it tells the story of Tony Soprano, a man who takes over a New Jersey crime family while at the same time trying to keep his own family together. It's one of the most compelling pieces of TV I've ever seen. It was done by HBO, so HBO changed the whole idea of what television should be or could be when they brought in this idea that it's not TV, it's HBO. That was the slogan. And it allowed for more adult content like swearing and violence and more adult themes to be broadcast to a much wider audience. The show kind of follows Tony when he's trying to deal with being the boss of this crime family while being a father and a husband. And a lot of the times, the most compelling storylines were when he's dealing with his family, like his actual family, his young kids, and he's trying to be a dad, and he's dealing with all these normal problems that normal people deal with. But then he's also got these other problems where he's dealing with FBI informants and killing his friends and having to run, crazy elaborate scams and schemes, while at the same time his son's being a little shit at school. And it's just amazing, amazing television.
It's like when they're little and they get sick. You'd give anything in the world to trade places with them so they don't have to suffer. And then to think you're the cause of it.
How are you the cause of it?
It's in his blood, this miserable fucking existence. My rotten fucking putrid genes have infected my kid's soul. That's my gift to my son.
One of the best things about it is how it portrayed Tony, who is your typical sort of alpha male tough guy. He spends a whole thread of the whole series, the whole show, is him in therapy, talking about his problems and getting help about these issues and chatting about it, and really kind of explore the idea that men can do this and it's not taboo. I really genuinely believe it's helped a lot of people take away the stigmatism of getting therapy or asking for help, especially men who don't seem to be too keen to do that. The other amazing thing about it is the intro, which is just iconic. The song and the trip that Tony's taking in his car is one of the things you will just never skip. If you're watching it and repeat, you'll just never skip the intro. Now, the ending of The Sopranos was one that caused major controversy, major controversy, to the point where people thought their TVs had broken. Essentially, it just cuts to black. Boom, that's it, gone. And you're left to wonder what the fate of Tony was. Did he die? Did he survive? The idea being that you can kind of make it up on your own. Now, David Chase has later come out and said that no, Tony did die. And there's seeds planted throughout the whole show and the final season and the final episode especially to suggest that yes, he did die. But that was a big deal back then. That was kind of the burgeoning of the internet, and people started freaking out when they watched it and they couldn't understand what was going on. A show had never ended like that before, on that so ambiguous of an ending. Curb Your Enthusiasm, another HBO show here. So HBO gets a lot of attention on this list, but it's written and created and stars Larry David. Larry David coming from having created Seinfeld with Jerry Seinfeld.
toilet now.
I'm sorry about that, but it has nothing to do with her. I can't stand the sound of the human voice. It's disturbing.
You can't stand the sound of the human voice?
What are you talking about?
You know, my father used to sing in the house all the time. I couldn't take it, and
Now, Seinfeld wasn't a show that I really watched a lot. I was more of a Friends person than Seinfeld, but I did find it quite funny. It was all right. Curb Your Enthusiasm basically takes place in a semi-fictionalized world of the world of Larry David. What happens to Larry David after he does Seinfeld? And there are two really, really unique things about Curb Your Enthusiasm which make it one of the best shows on TV. Now, it breaks my rules of great television shows slightly in that it's still running, like it's still going. But one of the things that makes it great is that they will only do a series if Larry thinks he's got a good story to tell. So there goes many years in between seasons, but Larry will only come back to do the season if he's got a really good story, if he's got a compelling story to write, if there's something he wants to say. So it's not just every year he has to pump out content, which gets then stale when you're forced to put stuff out. You lose your passion for it. But because Larry had basically a blank check in terms of credibility with the studios after doing Seinfeld, he was able to negotiate that he can do the series whenever he wants. So it's been running for over 20 years, but we're only on we go on to season 13. So there are big gaps sometimes, 3 or 4 years in between series or seasons, just so that Larry has time to come up with a story. And if he doesn't want to come up with a story, he won't go back and do it. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't need the credibility or the fame. He doesn't need to do the show, which is why it's so good. Because when you aren't forced or needed to do something, you only do it because you want to. And when you want to do something, you're passionate about it. The other really good thing about Curb Your Enthusiasm, which makes it one of the great shows, is that most of the dialogue is ad-libbed. There's a general skeleton of how a scene or a story is going to go out, but the actors are then left to essentially fill in the rest. And this leads to some really natural and dynamic conversations happening. Conversations that you can envisage yourself having with another person. A lot of times when you're watching a show, you read you see what they're hear what they're saying, and it feels like it's written. It's like normal human wouldn't speak like that, but you would write that stuff down, and when it comes out, it just doesn't feel natural. The Curb does it the completely opposite way. There's a basic outline of a story, and then they cast just have a conversation, and it becomes supernatural, and you get to see the genuine reaction of people that they would have if they were in that situation, having that conversation with another person. And this is a prime example of that happening.
I need a good series.
is life too short? You think it's too short?
Yeah.
It's too short, isn't it?
But now my life is fucking way short.
I'm
You
sorry.
ruined my fucking pilot because of your recommendation. I could see if it came from a skinhead.
Yeah.
Or one of Bin Laden's people.
Call him Ben Laden or Bin Laden?
I don't know.
Called him Ben. That's almost like a Jewish name.
That's
you
true.
know?
Bin Laden does sound like a shirt maker in Manhattan.
Yes,
doesn't it?
I know.
Go to Ben Laden's. They got great collars.
Exactly, yeah.
Breaking Bad, written or created by Vince Gilligan, starring Bryan Cranston and Aaron Paul, charts the story of a man who is diagnosed with cancer. He's a lowly high school teacher of chemistry, but he's a genius.
Why do you do it?
Money? Mainly?
There you go.
Nah, come on. Man, some straight like you, giant stick up his ass, all of a sudden at age, 60, he's just gonna break bad?
I'm 50.
He's diagnosed with cancer, he's given a few years to live. And he decides that he needs to leave. He needs to make sure his family are going to be taken care of when he dies. This is one of his biggest fears, is that his family aren't going to be taken care of when he dies. So he goes to try and find a way to secure them a future. And a chance meeting with Jesse, played by Aaron Paul, one of his former students, leads him down the road of becoming a meth cook and dealer. So he's going to cook meth and sell meth. He's going to do drugs. He's going to sell drugs, basically. Now, over the course of the show, we get to see Walter slowly becoming a new person. Heisenberg is what his alter ego is.
Now, say my name. Heisenberg. You're goddamn right.
And Walter does very questionable things in his pursuit of ensuring his family's future, to the point where you start to believe that is he actually the hero of this story. But you see that he's got flaws, but he's still doing it for his family. That's the idea. And there's this role reversal around about halfway through the show, where Jesse becomes Walter's conscience, and he's sort of saying he's going too far, and he's trying to pull him back. And it was a bit of a leap, I think, to cast Bryan Cranston in the role of Walter White. It was such a far stretch from his previous roles in like Malcolm in the Middle, where he plays this kind of goofy dad. He's a comic relief. He plays essentially a nincompoop, an idiot. To go to playing Walter White, who's this genius and might even be a psychopath, but yeah, he's got good intentions. And the acting from Bryan Cranston is just phenomenal. Like, you can see it here. Now, the show's ending was, in my opinion, is a masterclass of storytelling, because it comes down to Walter having to redeem himself for the actions he's taken in pursuit of looking after his family. And like a lot of heroes who are just sort of selfless, they're doing things for selfish reasons, as it turns out, he admits at the end, basically, that he did all this stuff for himself. Like, he just believed that he deserved more out of life, like a lot of people do. He had a shitty job, and his family didn't really respect him. He was kind of just a loser. But he wanted more out of life. But in the end, he realizes that he had everything he really needed. His family. And now he's lost all that. But he did it for himself because he thought he deserved more. And whether or not he redeems himself in the end is really up to you guys to figure out. That's up to you. I feel like he did, and the ending is just phenomenal. And it's the way to end a story. It's ended. Now, there was a Netflix film which kind of tried to bring it in. I think it was called The Camino or something like that. El Camino. That was it. But without Walter, it really just didn't work. Jesse on his own wasn't compelling enough for me for that story. But it was good to see Jesse get his final sort of redemption as well. The Office. Created by Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant, and starring Ricky Gervais. Now, on paper, this show sounds like it should be so boring that it's unwatchable. It's a mockumentary or mock documentary of the life on trials of an office of workers for a mid-sized paper company in Slough. Now, Slough's just a kind of a nowhere town outside of London, and it's so mundane and boring. The whole point is it's so average, yeah. But because it was so average and boring, people really gravitated towards it and got drawn into it, because you can just see yourself in those. People were watching the show and living this thing at the same time, and you get to see a whole spectrum of like human emotions and human like psyche and characters like laid out. You've got the boss who is so desperate for people's approval and attention that he'll do anything to get it, including like debasing himself in shameful ways, like the following.
Yeah, music and everything. Well, well, as it's for charity, just a little bit. It's like, that's it.
Then you've got Tim, the guy who's basically, essentially hates himself and his job, but is too lazy to really do anything about it because it kind of just works for him. Eventually, he does the right thing, and he moves on. I don't know. I don't want to know. Like at the end of the very short run, it was 2 seasons and 2 Christmas specials, I think it was. And that was the story they wanted to tell. And it was a compact story, and it said everything they wanted to tell. And the characters grew or didn't grow and in exactly the right amount and exactly the right way. Now, one of the problems I have with American TV, typically, is that it goes on too long. They get a moneymaker and they just keep going and going and going until the characters and the situations are so far removed from what they were like at the start that made the show great that it's just not watchable anymore. And the prime example of that is, ironically, The Office US. Now, it's a good show, but at the end, near in the middle seasons, the characters just become parodies of what they were to begin with, to the point where they're not relatable at all anymore. They're not realistic. So it's a completely different show. And a lot of times, American shows, especially American adaptations of British shows, just don't understand when to quit. The Thick of It, another great example of British comedy and satire done amazingly well. It doesn't really work in any other country other than Britain, if I'm honest. Created by Armando Iannucci and starring Peter Capaldi amongst others. It was like an ensemble cast, but Peter Capaldi, probably the biggest name in the show. So it follows the lives of a political department in the UK. It's a fictional government. It's a dark comedy which focus on the absurdities of politics and the civil service, and it really gets in depth about how the civil service and politicians are kind of at war. The civil service being the forever, whereas the politicians come and go like a merry-go-round. Now, ironically, it doesn't actually ever get too political. No one party or one subject is treated with any greater reverence than any others. They're all shown as basically the same, backstabbing, self-serving narcissists, no matter what side of the political divide they're on, and sometimes they even swap just so they can get a leg up. The endless war between the civil service and the politicians is seen no better than in this scene, I think.
Am I being threatened by Harold fucking Bishop?
No, Malcolm. Okay, look, guys, can we just...
Oh, shit, wow, here's the bee's fucking Power Ranger now.
Yeah, and we're taking her back.
Do not make this a disciplinary issue.
Now, Peter Capaldi's character, Malcolm Tucker, is loosely based on a real-life character, Alistair Darling, and the sort of Tony Blair, New Labour era. It's a much more switched, like up to 11 sort of version of that, but it's essentially based off of him. And it did get spun off into not really a spin-off into a movie. It was kind of the movie was another telling of the same story, which wasn't done as well, I think. It's just it was I think it'd gotten too successful at that point, so it lost some of its magic. But this is definitely one to go and watch if you can find it. Scrubs. It might not be on a lot of people's best TV shows of all time list, but for me, it holds a special place in my heart.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.
Because of the time it came out and the stories it was telling. It was created by Bill Lawrence and stars Zach Braff. Again, amongst others, but Zach is really the kind of the focus title character, JD. It follows the lives of some newly graduated doctors and their journey into the world of medicine and America, especially American medicine, which is a very different beast to like UK and European hospitals. But it shows the world through JD's eyes, and you get to hear JD's internal monologue and dialogue about his situations, which we all have. So it's just a good different way of doing storytelling.
I've been waiting for this moment all my life.
Easy, Chewie.
JD's a very sort of fanciful character, and he has a lot of daydreams, and you get to see those daydreams and fantasies played out in real life with the characters. And it's really, really fun to watch. One of the greatest things about the show, other than it just being funny, is its dedication to showcasing the real working world of a hospital. And a lot of doctors and nurses, people who are in that world, have come out and said it's a very accurate representation of how doctors and nurses and that behave. I don't have a context for that because I'm not a doctor or a nurse, so I'll have to take their word for it. But it seems it's very silly, and it's not so serious as you expect from other sort of medical dramas like ER and Casualty and things like that, where everything's very super serious. And you got to remember, doctors are just people, especially young doctors. They're going to be goofy and silly. But one of the best things about the show was the music. The music was really, really on point and really just worked for every time they used it. And it introduced a lot of bands that I certainly never heard of, and I think a lot of other people hadn't really heard of, including like The Fray and Joshua Radin, people like that. Peep Show, which a UK-based comedy again, show starring David Mitchell and Robert Webb. Now, the unique premise of this show is that it's filmed in first person, so you're showing the audience the story as if you were one of the main characters, and it flips between David Mitchell's Mark and Robert Webb's Jez. And the story is very, very simple. It's two blokes living in a flat, and one, Mark, is super uptight and always follows the rules. He works in a bank, and he's a stickler for everything. He's a history buff and he's a bit of a nerd. And you've got Jez, who's basically just a drug addict and really still thinks trancey band will make it into the big time. It's kind of a new version or new telling of The Odd Couple, in a way. It's, as I say, it's shot in first person, which just gives you a super unique take on a story. You get to see exactly from everything, from like people, from this was the technology of them showing how they, you kiss someone like in first person mode, and doing everything. You get to hear their internal monologue, and it just really adds so much depth to the storytelling. The ending of the show, of Peep Show, was just brilliant in so many ways, in that Mark and Jez perform absolutely zero growth. There is no character development, there is nothing. They are in exactly the same position they are in at the end of the show as they are at the start. And I really like that, because not everybody grows and not everybody gets better. There's no revelations about your life all the time. Sometimes you're just in the same place you were 5 years ago. But that's okay, because you had a great journey along the way. And that's what happens with these guys. They have a great journey along the way, but they don't grow and nothing changes. They're exactly the same. And it's just brilliant. So the last one on my list is Halt and Catch Fire, created by Christopher Cantwell and starring Lee Pace and Scoot McNairney. Again, other people were heavily involved in the show, but Lee and Scoot, which I always thought was Scott. I thought that was a misprint, but that was me being arrogant. Lee and Scoot are definitely the main characters, and they're the two the ones that sort of butt heads the most. Essentially, it follows the computer PC revolution of the 80s and 90s, and it charts major technology innovations from the laptop all the way up to the World Wide Web. And you get to see like the people and all the effort that it took to make those technology breakthroughs that we just take for granted these days. All the breakthroughs that were made in this era that allowed for things to get to the point where they're at now, where you have mobile phones and the internet on your phone, and everything is, you know, in one place, and you have supercomputers and Wi-Fi and all this sort of stuff. It comes from these people. So in a really emotional and, you know, often funny story. It's fictionalized, but you can tell the inspirations behind each of the major season like story elements. And to end the way it did with the song Salisbury Hill is just beautiful, and it's certainly one I'd definitely if you're into technology in any way, it's definitely one I'd recommend if you can get hold of it. That's the list of what I think of the greatest TV shows of all time, but there have been a few that almost could have made the list had they just stuck the landing or just not messed up a wee bit. Yeah, I want to give some honourable mentions to those. Now, the biggest one, I think, is Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones was so good at the beginning that it was so influential that I mean, about the time I was getting married, when it came out, a lot of the elements of the Game of Thrones ended up in my wedding. It was so well written. The acting was on point, absolutely perfect. Storytelling and pacing, character development, everything was perfect for the first 2-3 seasons. It starts to dip in quality and go downhill a little bit after that. But then you get seasons 7 and 8, which were so bad, they were almost offensive to watch. Absolute zero care was given to the writing, to the sets, to the characters, to any of the development that had been done in the previous seasons. It was all flushed down the toilet. And it's so awful that it's ruined the good seasons. And it's killed an entire like franchise. There was so many spin-offs due to happen. So many. I guarantee there would have been movies planned in the works. Spin-offs, like prequels, sequels. They've basically all been canned. There is a sequel coming out, a prequel coming out, House of the Dragon, which is apparently very good, but the end of the Game of Thrones was so awful that I can't watch any of those other things because it was so bad. I've never ever experienced a show's quality dip from such highs to such lows in such a short space of time. The two writers, D&D, should be ashamed. They killed their own child just so they could try and get onto the next project. But they did themselves such a disservice that now no one will touch them. And it's rightful. Because it seems to have been done on purpose. That's the only way I can describe it. It was done on purpose. It's that bad. A YouTuber once said that it doesn't matter if you've had the greatest meal on earth. If your dessert comes and someone's taken a shit on it, that's all you're going to remember. And that's exactly what they did. Another one like that was Lost. Now, Lost suffered from the problem I kind of talked about earlier with shows having to go on and on and on. And it had a great premise, a singular premise for 1 or 2 seasons. But it was so popular that they kept it going and going and going and going to the point where it became ridiculous. None of the characters made any sense anymore. Nothing it was all just shoehorned in. New writers were brought in all the time. And there was no coherence, and nothing ever made sense. To the point where people still don't understand the ending, really. Lost, that was a misfire due to greed. That could have been a fantastic show and remembered forever as one of the best shows if it ended on season 2. But people, especially TV networks, they can't do that. If they get a hit, they just want to keep pumping it and pumping it and pumping it. This is what I feel happened to the next one on my had potential list, which was Fringe. Fringe was a really good show, and it's still got a huge following. People who really liked it. It was kind of like an X-Files meets, I don't know, kind of meets Star Trek in a way. It was very, very sci-fi based, X-Files, Freak of the Week sort of idea. And it was really, really cool. But they got to the point where I think season 3, 4, when it started to go into parallel dimensions and things just went off the wall and it started to lose coherence. And again, should have ended well before it did. Fringe is still one. If you want to watch the first 2 seasons, yeah, you'll still have a lot of enjoyment out of it. Just stop watching after that because it doesn't work. There's 2 more left. The next one is Community. Now, Community, this one really hurts because it was created by Dan Harmon, who is someone I really like. Dan Harmon created Rick and Morty, things like that. Really funny. Community season 1 and 2 are just hilarious. It's about a community college in America, and you've got this. It's a ragtag group of misfits that come together to form a family, and it's really, really good. I think it's season 4 where they fired Dan Harmon as the showrunner, and it just goes down bad. It goes down hard. There was also things in the back behind the scenes where Chevy Chase, who was starring in it, did not want to be there. He did not want to be there at all. The whole working environment was terrible for everyone. But then they brought Dan Harmon back, and the premise was over because it's about people who are studying at community college who should have left many years ago. So instead of bringing in new blood, they just kept trying to repeat or rehash over and over again. There was ways it could have been done. You could have done like half a semester per season. So you did your 6 seasons, that takes you to 3 years. And that could have worked. But again, the premise of a show was phenomenally funny. And I still do watch it sometimes. But bits of it are hard to get through. And lastly is The Simpsons. Now, The Simpsons is one that is strange because it's still going. And people still enjoy it. And it's something you can watch. It started off, in the 80s and early 90s. And it was really good. It was funny. It was like a cartoon, but it was a cartoon that was made for both children and adults. It was a very unique concept at the time. Nowadays you get animated shows that are purely for adults and animated shows which are sort of family-based for everyone. But The Simpsons was really revolutionary at that time. And it's been going on ever since. Like, it's been continuing to go. But there's definitely a drop in quality. And people will argue when that drop happened. People will argue it happened way back in like season 4. Other people will argue it's season 15, 16. You're into it must be season 30 by now. But it's still going. It's one of those shows which will always, it changed the landscape of TV and made things acceptable which were not really deemed acceptable before. And it has pushed the boundaries occasionally, but at this point it's been going on for so long that it really can't maintain the quality that it had before. It's just not possible. You just have to rehash the same stories over and over again, which it does do. So that's my list of what I consider to be the greatest shows on TV ever. I wonder what your list would entail. Now, there's probably some more I could have added on there, but they didn't really meet my criteria of endlessly rewatchable, which is essentially the only thing I really care about. Can I rewatch this show again and again and again? We can get the same level, or at least a sort of mirrored level of enjoyment that I got when I originally saw it. So there are shows which I really, really liked. Monty Python, yeah. Only Fools and Horses, things like that. These are kind of more like British things, but I can't really watch them again and get the same level of enjoyment I did when I first watched them. IT Crowd, as well. But that's my list. Let me know your thoughts. As always, I love to hear it. I love to hear in the comments if you think I'm right or if you think I'm really right. But let me know what your shows are. They'll be definitely different to mine. I'd love to hear it. So, as always, let me know below. And if you like what I'm doing, hit the subscribe.